Hi there and welcome again to the New Albany Food Pantry Community Kitchen. Today we're going to be talking about making some homemade artisan yeast bread. Simple bread, a recipe that can offer you homemade bread in 5 minutes a day, or actually the same recipe can help you put together a really yummy homemade pizza. So we're going to talk about first how to mix up this very basic bread dough, and I mean it's very simple. So what you'll need to do equipment wise is you need a container that's about 6 quarts, 3 to 6 quarts. I'm going to do half the recipe that you're going to be receiving. You need some flour, you need a little bit of yeast, which we'll talk about as we're using it, and a little teeny bit of salt and some water, and those are all the ingredients we need to make this great mixture. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the yeast dough. So what we're going to do first is we're going to use some warm water. You can take it out of the tap. It's got to be warm, no warmer than 110 degrees, because if the water's hotter than that, which is just above body temperature actually, if it's hotter than that, you will kill off your yeast and you won't get a nice rise in the dough that we'll be looking for. So I have taken water out of the tap, and I've added it to my container. And to the water, I'm going to add what I have up here, which is some active dry yeast. I also have in this very large bottle what we call instant yeast. And there is a difference between the two products, and that'll be a discussion we can do in a kitchen minute maybe sometime. But suffice it to say, yeast is a living organism that's actually gone dormant until it becomes wet. And until you feed it with sugar or flour. So for this recipe, what we're going to do is we're going to add our yeast to our warm water, and we're going to mix it around to let the yeast wake up in the warm water. Okay? Next, what we're going to do is we're going to add our, in this case I have 3 1/4 cups of flour because it's half the recipe. And I'm just using all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour as well. If you want to use a substitution for a different kind of flour to make a gluten-free bread, we'll have to talk about it, changing the recipe a little bit. So for now, we're making a gluten-filled bread that we all love. So I've just added the flour directly to the water that had the yeast in it. And now I'm going to add my salt onto the top of the flour. So you can see I'm not adding the salt directly to the yeast and the water, as some recipes will have you do, because as I learned, one of the enemies of yeast is salt. And if you add your salt directly to your yeast in the water, you'll actually kill your yeast, so you won't get the rise in the bread that you want as well. So that's why what I did is I have water, then flour, then salt, sort of a layer. You add it all together and then you just mix. And literally, this is how you make your bread dough. You simply mix the flour and the yeast and the water together. I generally like to use my wooden spoon instead of my whisk. So let me go ahead and pull some of this off of here. And continue mixing with my wooden spoon instead. Because you can see the problem with doing bread dough with a whisk is you lose all of your beautiful dough on the whisk, and it takes a long time to clean it off. So anyway, all right, so I'm going to go back to mixing my bread dough with my wooden spoon, and here's all you need to do. Literally mix the water and the flour together. You don't have to be delicate. You take control. I like to even tip my container on the side, so I make sure I'm mixing in all the water and all the flour from the side of the container. It looks pretty tough, doesn't it? But what you want to do is you want to take control of the mixture to make sure that all of your water and flour are mixed together. And literally, that is your bread dough, your bread and your pizza dough. Nothing harder than that. No more ingredients than that. Literally flour, yeast, water, and salt. Now you'll see that I have kind of a sticky mixture, And that's exactly like we want it. We don't need this. That's the beauty of this recipe as well. It's a no-knead yeast bread, okay? This is the point at which we leave our dough for 2 hours on the counter, just lightly covered. And after 2 hours, you'll see the rise from the reaction of the yeast and the from eating what they need from the flour, producing the gas that comes from the yeast after they've been satisfied. And yes, it is gas just like our gas. It's actually CO2 gas that they burp up and pass that gives us the beautiful rise in our dough. So this you just place over on your counter for 2 hours, and you'll see the perfect amount of rise that comes from your dough. So let me show you now that we've mixed up the dough, how it comes out and what we can actually do with it. So after the 2 hours time, you can see that the dough has significantly risen, right? You can see the side of the bowl where the you can see the air pockets, and that's actually a nice risen dough, right? Now at this point, the dough can be put in the refrigerator and saved if you're not going to use it right away. We can form it into some beautiful artisan bread or rolls, or actually it can be used to make a beautiful pizza, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. So let me go ahead and show you how it is that we form this nice risen dough into what we call a boulé, which is a round loaf of bread, a beautiful French word. You can see that this dough is still a little bit sticky, and so what you want to do when you're taking it out of the container is add a little bit of flour to the top, and that'll allow you to pull it right out of your container, and you can drop it on your counter. I've already prepared a tray here with parchment paper, and you'll see the other ingredient that's called for in the recipe is a little bit of cornmeal. I use a really coarse ground cornmeal. It's actually sort of like a polenta, so that's how thick it is. If you know cornmeal in those little containers that come from Quaker Oats or whatever, they actually are corn. It's more powder, and it doesn't do this job as well. So you really want a coarser ground cornmeal. And what you're going to do on your paper tray is just add a bunch of cornmeal. Now this is going to do a few different things for you. It's going to allow your bread not to stick to your parchment paper as it's baking. It's also going to give it a beautiful crunchy bottom of that artisan bread, and that's part of that bread that we love so much, the beautiful crust and the crunch on the bottom. So our pan is prepared to go. Here is my dough. Now I want to show you, we want to handle this dough not a whole lot, because the more you hold it and handle it, the more it'll lose its the rise that the yeast provided. So we're not going to need it. What we're going to do is we're going to do some what they call gluten sheeting, right? Which is a fancy term for take the dough in a circle in your hands and spread it over on itself, and then turn it a quarter and spread it over on itself again, and then turn it and do it again. And you're going to do that for about 40 seconds, 45 seconds. You're just pulling it over on itself. And what you're doing is you're stretching and you're breaking those gluten strands that are in it. And that is indeed what gives the bread its beautiful bite that we love so much, right? And here I have a sheeted boulé of bread dough that I am then just going to lay in the middle of my prepared pan. So there we are. Actually, we're very close to being able to put this back in the oven. We want to let it rise for a few minutes before we put it in the oven. And we're going to give it that beautiful artisan look by sprinkling a little bit of flour on the top. And we're going to go ahead and also, with a sharp knife, go ahead and make a couple cuts on the top of the dough. And you can use scissors or you can use a sharp knife, but what it does is it allows a little escape of that, some of that CO2 and the rising that happens when you let your dough rise, but it also allows it to give it a beautiful shape that we like, again, for that artisan look of the bread. Now we sprinkle it on the top for look, but it's also because as the bread bakes at the 450 degrees in the oven, we are going to, together with some steam and the high heat of the oven, allow this flour to sort of caramelize, if you will. And it will break down, and that's what gives it that really hard outer crust that we love so much of our bread. So it has a soft, nice, white, firm texture, but it's got that really rich, brown, dark crust that we like so much. Okay? So this bread is about ready to go in the oven. We're going to cheat a little bit, although we could let it wait for 10 minutes. We're going to go ahead and put it in the oven now. It's ready to go. Okay? So the starch is going to break down and give us that dark brown crust, as I said. As we put the bread in the oven, the other thing we want to do is we're going to add a pan of water to the bottom of the oven. And what I have is 2 cups of warm, not cold water. And I'm just going to pour it into a pan that has been preheating in my oven. And what's going to happen is that water beneath the pan of bread is going to create steam within my hot oven, and it's going to cause that starch to break down and give us that dark crust. If you don't like that dark crust, or you want something that's a little bit softer, just don't put the water in there, because you won't get the same breakdown of the starch from the flour if you do it that way. So that bread will take us 25 minutes in the oven. So maybe in the meantime, what we'll do is I can show you my second favorite thing to do with this very easy dough, and that is create a pizza. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I have ahead of time, we can see our dough is beginning to rise a little bit already. I have already collected what I need when I do a homemade pizza. All my toppings, right? And most importantly, my piece of dough, which again is exactly the same dough that I've just used for the boule bread. The difference here is I've taken a piece of that dough, and this one I'm going to knead, okay? I'm going to knead it because the character of pizza dough is a little bit different than the bread character. We want an even chewier kind of character in our crust. So you literally are going to tear off a piece of this dough, and you're going to knead it for 10 minutes. Now I've, as you can imagine, already done most of the kneading to this piece of dough. And it has a much different character already than our bread dough had when we were shaping the boule, right? Because you remember we did the sheeting. For the pizza, we're not going to have to do that because instead of doing the sheeting, we actually did the kneading, okay? So this is my piece of pizza dough. And what I like to do when I make pizza is use my cast iron skillet. But you can certainly use a sheet pan just like we did. You would want to prepare your sheet pan like we did for the pizza. For the bread for your pizza. And what I'm going to do with my cast iron skillet is do the same thing. I'm going to add a little bit of that cornmeal to the bottom of my pan. And it's going to go ahead and give me that bottom crust that's dark and chewy and a little bit extra crispy from that cornmeal. So I have my pizza dough, and I like the best way to do it is sort of just work it in a circle and squeeze it as you're going. And as you do that, it's going to be getting bigger and bigger. That way, some people can use a rolling pin to stretch it. I can't spin it above my head like my friend does at Borgata restaurant. Just can't do it. but I do just simply work it in my hands like this. And the more you work it, keep in mind, the more chew character your pizza gets. So it's not going to harm it the more you stretch it. So I've gotten it about this big, and I'm going to place it into my cast iron skillet. Now what I'm going to do when I get it in here is I'm also going to keep working it, because I want it to fill the sides of the pan enough so that it'll hold my favorite ingredients. Right? Ooh. Okay. And give it a little bit of a punch. My finger. And you can see I have my pizza dough in my pan there, right? Okay, so what we're gonna do is think about how you want to top it, and that's the fun part about making your own homemade pizza, is you can have it be whatever you want it to be. I do, in this case, we're gonna do a red pizza sauce, that I created out of roasted tomatoes that we talked about when we were talking about how you roast any vegetable. Well, tomatoes is the one. And what do you do with some of your roasted vegetables? You make paninis, or you serve them on the side with rice, or you stir them into pasta, or you break them down in the food processor and you make them into your favorite pizza sauce. Okay, so that's what I did. So this is homemade roasted pizza sauce. And that'll be a kitchen minute that we're going to come up with, is showing you how exactly I took my roasted tomatoes and made them into pizza sauce. Very simple. So I'm going to top and now depending on how you like it, a lot of sauce or a little, you just add it to the top. And then you can use whatever other ingredients you like. And this time I'm going to use a little bit of olive condiment that I have. I'm going to add that to it. I also love mozzarella cheese. So today I have some fresh mozzarella in the little teeny tiny balls, or teeny tiny pieces. Now long ago I had a friend whose family owned a pizza shop. And he showed me, he used to make pizzas for them on the weekends. And so he always showed me how to top the pizza correctly. And he said, you begin in the center and work the way out, instead of just arbitrarily dropping the cheese and the flavorings on there. And that ensures that you get plenty of toppings in the middle and not everything on the sides. So here's to my friend who used to make pizza. I'm also, I think, going to use a little bit of this fresh basil. And I think I'm not even going to cut it. I'm going to take the small leaves and I'm just going to put them right on there. And that'll be a nice, real bite of basil when you're eating it, instead of just a little chiffonade or, sliver. It's going to be a serious bite of basil. And then I'm also going to use a little bit of shredded mozzarella cheese. So this is from the little package. This is fresh mozzarella. This is the low moisture mozzarella, and I'm going to add it to the middle, and I'm going to work the way out, just like my friend had said. Right? Looks good so far, doesn't it? So you can see, there's and it's actually the colors of Italy, right? The Italian flag, red, white, and green. I love that. And finally, I'm going to add a little bit of flavor on the top. This is what we call a za'atar spice, so it's kind of a Mediterranean oregano, has a little bit of sesame seed in it, a little bit of salt on the top. And that's really my pizza that I'm going to just put in the oven. I might also add a little splash of olive oil, and we'll put it in the oven and see how it turns out. So my bread is still cooking, but I'm gonna go ahead and add my pizza to it. And we'll see how the bread's doing. The bread needs a few more minutes. So we'll let both of those go ahead and cook through, and then we'll be back to show you the outcome of our beautiful artisan bread in 5 minutes a day. Let me tell you a little bit again about this dough. You saw how simple it was to mix up. Just a couple ingredients. The beautiful thing about this is once the dough is made, you seal it, you put it in the refrigerator, and you can have this dough in your refrigerator for up to 2 weeks. And as the dough sits in the refrigerator and you pull off a little every day to make some bread, if that's what you choose to do, the bread becomes more like a sourdough. So the yeast continues to ferment with the flour until it just can't anymore. But that's where that sourness of the dough comes. It becomes less rich. The rise falls a little bit over those 2 weeks, but then it makes a really, really good focaccia. Because you don't need that bread to be rise as much. So there's lots of stuff you can do with this dough. Very simple, very easy, a really good thing to try with your kids, and a really great way to have some really fresh bread whenever you need it. So we'll be back with our pizza and our bread in just a few minutes. Okay, so we're back. We've just waited patiently our 25 or 30 minutes to see the result of our beautiful bread dough and pizza dough. So I'm going to take them out of the oven one at a time. You can see one dough, different ways to use it. Here's my beautiful pizza in my cooked in my cast iron skillet. You can see that it comes out, it's a little bit thick. It's cooked on the bottom nicely. The top and the cheese has done well. It's about ready to dive into, I have to say. Here is the loaf of artisan bread. I think that you'd be very proud to serve to your company with a beautiful salad or a pasta dinner. And these bread they can look much like this. They can look a little bit darker at times. It's also nice to know the bottom, you know when it's done, when it makes kind of a hollow sound. An important final step for this bread is to really let it cool before you cut into it. Just like meat protein has sort of carryover cooking, we say, so does bread. So it needs a little bit more time to steam and finish cooking in the middle. So actually, I don't think that I'm going to cut it right now. I'm going to leave it to your imagination. But what we will do is go ahead and cut into our pizza, because I'm for sure going to give our camera lady just a big piece to taste. Because I know she'll go home and try this recipe. So remember, use the recipe we gave you. Try to be as creative with it as you can, because you know what I say, creativity and curiosity in the kitchen lead to really great things.